It was another ordinary day at Maplewood Middle School in a quiet little town in Texas. The sun shone brightly outside, casting golden light through the tall windows of Mrs. Carter's sixth-grade classroom. Inside, 24 students sat at their desks, listening, or pretending to listen, as Mr. Daniels droned on about World War II. His voice echoed off the walls as he scribbled dates and names on the chalkboard. Lily Parker shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She wasn't paying much attention to what Mr. Daniels was saying. Instead, she was staring out the window thinking about her Grandpa Joe. Her grandfather lived just down the street from her house, and every weekend, they would sit together, on the porch sipping lemonade while he told her stories about his time in Vietnam. To Lily, Grandpa Joe was more than just family. He was a hero. Suddenly, Mr. Daniels stopped writing and turned around to face the class. "All right," he said, clapping his hands together. "I want each of you to tell me something about your family members who served in wars. Let's go around the room." One by one, the students began sharing bits and pieces of their relatives' military histories. Some talked about great-grandfathers who fought in World War II. Others mentioned uncles who had been deployed to Iraq or Afghanistan. When it came to Billy Harper's turn, he proudly declared that his dad was currently serving overseas. Everyone clapped politely, though Lily noticed Billy puffing out his chest a little afterward. Finally, it was Lily's turn. She swallowed hard and stood up slowly, feeling all eyes on her. My grandpa fought in Vietnam," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "He's a war hero." The room fell silent. Mr. Daniels raised an eyebrow and crossed his arms over his chest. "A war hero?" he repeated, his tone dripping with skepticism. "What makes you say that? Did he win some big medal or something?" Lily hesitated, taken aback by the question. She didn't know exactly what medals her grandpa had earned because he never liked talking about them. All she knew was that he had risked his life to save people during the war. He saved lives," she stammered. "He led missions and helped bring soldiers back safely." Mr. Daniels let out a sharp laugh that made several students flinch. "Oh, come now," he said, shaking his head. "Your grandfather wasn't a hero. He was just another soldier doing his job. There's nothing special about that." Lily felt her cheeks burning. How could he say such a thing? Didn't he understand how brave her grandpa was? Clenching her fists, she shot back, "You don't know him. You can't just dismiss what he did." The room grew even quieter, if that was possible. Mr. Daniels narrowed his eyes, clearly annoyed by Lily's defiance. For a moment, no one moved. Then, without warning, he stepped forward and slapped her across the face. The sound of the slap rang out like a gunshot. Lily staggered backward, her hand flying to her stinging cheek. Tears welled up in her eyes as she stared at Mr. Daniels, in disbelief. Around her, the other students gasped and whispered among themselves. "Sit down," Mr. Daniels snapped, pointing at her desk. "And learn some respect." Lily obeyed, sinking into her chair as tears spilled down her face. She couldn't believe what had just happened. No teacher had ever hit her before, not like this. It felt wrong, unfair, and deeply humiliating. As the lesson continued, Lily kept her head down, trying to hide her tears. But inside, she was seething. Why had Mr. Daniels reacted so harshly? Why did he refuse to acknowledge her grandpa's bravery? These questions swirled in her mind, making it impossible for her to focus on anything else. When the bell finally rang, signaling the end of class, Lily grabbed her backpack and bolted out of the room. She didn't stop running until she reached the girls' bathroom, where she locked herself in a stall and cried. Word of the incident spread quickly throughout the school. By lunchtime, nearly everyone knew what had happened. Some kids approached Lily in the cafeteria, offering sympathetic words or patting her shoulder awkwardly. Others whispered behind her back, speculating about whether Mr. Daniels would get fired. Meanwhile, parents started calling the school, demanding answers. One mother even showed up in person, storming into the principal's office to demand justice for Lily. Rumors flew about what might happen next. Would Mr. Daniels be suspended? Fired? Or would the whole thing blow over without any consequences? But amidst all the chaos, No one expected what came next. Later that afternoon, as the final bell rang and students poured out of the building, a stranger walked into the school's front doors. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with piercing blue eyes and a cowboy hat perched atop his head. Several staff members recognized him immediately. It was Chuck Norris. No one knew why he was there, or how he had heard about the incident, but one thing was certain. Things were about to change. The news of Chuck Norris arriving at Maplewood Middle School spread like wildfire. By the time he stepped into the principal's office, nearly everyone in the building had heard about it. Teachers whispered to each other in the hallways. Students peeked out of classroom doors, and even the janitor stopped mopping to get a better look. Principal Thompson, a kind but firm woman in her late 50s, greeted him warmly. "Mr. Norris," she said, shaking his hand, "we're honored that you've taken the time to visit our school." Chuck tipped his cowboy hat slightly and gave her a polite nod. "Ma'am, I'm here because I heard about what happened yesterday. If it's all right with you, I'd like to speak to both the student involved and the teacher." Principal Thompson hesitated for a moment, unsure if this was a good idea, but something about Chuck's steady gaze reassured her. "Of course," she said finally. "Let me gather them for you." Within minutes, Lily and Mr. Daniels were seated across from Chuck in a small conference room. The atmosphere was tense, almost suffocating. Lily sat nervously, twisting her fingers together as she tried not to cry again. Mr. Daniels, on the other hand, looked uncomfortable, shifting in his chair and avoiding eye contact. Principal Thompson stood nearby, watching, silently. "All right," Chuck began, his voice calm but commanding. "I want to hear what happened, from both sides." Lily swallowed hard and glanced up at him. There was something comforting about his presence, like he truly cared about what she had to say. Taking a deep breath, she started speaking. "Was just telling the class about my grandpa," she said softly. "He fought in Vietnam, and I called him a war hero because, well, he is one. He saved lives during the war, and he never talks about it. But I know how brave he is." When I said that, Mr. Daniels laughed and told me my grandpa wasn't a hero. He was just another soldier doing his job. Then he hit me when I tried to defend him. Her voice cracked on the last sentence, and tears welled up in her eyes again. She quickly wiped them away, embarrassed to show weakness in front of someone like Chuck Norris. Chuck nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. Turning to Mr. Daniels, he asked, "Is that true? Did you slap her?" Mr. Daniels cleared his throat and straightened his posture, trying to appear more confident than he felt. "Yes, I did," he admitted reluctantly, "but only because she was being disrespectful in class. She talked back to me, and I needed to maintain control over the situation." Chuck raised an eyebrow. "So hitting a child is your way of maintaining control?" "It wasn't personal," Mr. Daniels insisted, though his voice wavered slightly. "I didn't mean to hurt her. I just wanted her to understand authority." Chuck leaned back in his chair, studying the teacher carefully. "Authority doesn't come from fear," he said firmly. "It comes from earning respect, and respect isn't earned by slapping kids or belittling their families." Mr. Daniels opened his mouth to argue, but thought better of it. Instead, he sank lower into his chair, looking increasingly uneasy. Principal Thompson, who had been quietly observing the exchange, finally spoke up. "Mr. Norris, thank you for stepping in. We take these matters very seriously, and will make sure appropriate action is taken." Chuck nodded, but didn't seem entirely satisfied. "Good," he said, "but there's more to this story than just punishing bad behavior. That girl's grandfather sounds like a remarkable man. I'd like to meet him, if that's okay with you, Lily." Lily blinked in surprise. You want to meet my grandpa?" "Yes," Chuck replied with a warm smile. "If he's half the person you say he is, I think we could all learn something from him." Later that afternoon, Chuck accompanied Lily to her home. It wasn't far from the school, a modest house with a white picket fence and flower beds lining the front yard. As they walked up the driveway, Lily spotted her grandpa sitting on the porch reading a book. "Grandpa," she called out, running ahead. Joe Parker looked up and smiled, setting his book aside. "Well, hello there, sweetheart," he said, standing up to greet her. Then he noticed Chuck standing behind her and froze, his eyes widening in shock. Are you? Joe trailed off, pointing at Chuck uncertainly. Chuck chuckled and extended his hand. Yes, sir. I'm Chuck Norris. And you must be Joe Parker, the war hero. Joe shook his head vigorously, waving off the compliment. Oh, no, I'm no hero, just a regular guy who did his duty. That's not what I've heard, Chuck said, pulling up a chair to sit beside him. Your granddaughter tells me you led some pretty incredible missions in Vietnam. Care to share? Joe hesitated, glancing at Lily before sighing deeply. All right, he said gruffly, but only because you're asking so nicely. For the next hour, Joe recounted his experiences during the war. He spoke about the long nights spent patrolling dense jungles, the camaraderie among his fellow soldiers, and the harrowing rescue missions that tested his courage. One story in particular stood out: a daring operation to save a group of wounded soldiers trapped behind enemy lines. Against overwhelming odds, Joe and his team managed to extract every single survivor, risking their own lives in the process. When he finished speaking, Chuck sat in silence for a moment, clearly moved by the tali. That's exactly the kind of bravery I admire, he said earnestly. Men like you don't need medals or titles to prove your worth. You carry honor in everything you do. Joe chuckled nervously, scratching the back of his neck. I don't know about all that. I just did what anyone else would have done. No, Chuck countered firmly. Not everyone would have done what you did, and that's why people like you deserve to be remembered, not dismissed. Lily listened intently, feeling a surge of pride swell in her chest. Hearing her grandpa's stories firsthand made her realize just how extraordinary he really was. Before leaving, Chuck turned to Lily and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Your grandpa may not call himself a hero, but he is one, in my book anyway. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise. With that, Chuck tipped his hat and headed back to his car, leaving Lily and Joe sitting together on the porch. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. You didn't tell me you knew Chuck Norris, Joe teased, nudging Lily playfully. She grinned, still processing everything that had happened. Neither did he, she replied. As they watched the horizon together, Lily felt a newfound sense of determination. Whatever came next, she knew she wouldn't back down, not when it came to defending the people she loved. The next morning, Lily woke up feeling different. For the first time since the incident at school, she didn't feel weighed down by sadness or anger. Instead, there was a spark of hope inside her, a belief that things could change. She got dressed quickly and headed downstairs, where her grandpa was already sitting at the kitchen table, sipping his usual cup of black coffee. Morning, sunshine, Joe said, giving her a warm smile. Sleep well? Lily nodded, taking a seat across from him. Yeah, I did. Thanks, Grandpa. Joe chuckled softly. You're welcome, but I think we both know it wasn't just my snoring keeping you up last night. Lily laughed, despite herself. I guess not. I've been thinking about what Mr. Norris said, about how people should remember stories like yours. Joe sighed, setting his mug down gently. Stories are important, kiddo. They teach us lessons and remind us where we came from. But they're not everything. What really matters is how we live our lives today. Before Lily could respond, there was a knock at the door. She glanced at her grandpa curiously before hopping up to answer it. Standing outside was none other than Chuck Norris, still wearing his signature cowboy hat and a friendly grin. Good morning, he said, tipping his hat. Mind if I join you folks for breakfast? I brought donuts. Lily's eyes widened in surprise. Donuts? Sure, Joe chuckled as he stood to greet their unexpected guest. Well, come on in, Mr. Norris. Can't say no to donuts, can we? They all settled around the kitchen table, munching on glazed pastries while chatting casually. After a few minutes, Chuck turned to Joe with a thoughtful expression. Yo. No, he began. What happened at that school? It's bigger than just one teacher losing his temper. It's about respect. Respect for veterans, sure, but also for kids like Lily who stand up for what's right. Joe nodded slowly, stroking his chin. I agree. But respect doesn't come easy these days. Folks forget the sacrifices made, not just by soldiers but by families too. That's why I'm here, Chuck replied firmly. To remind people of those sacrifices, and maybe help turn this situation into something positive. Lily perked up at that. What do you mean? Chuck leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. I mean, let's use this moment to educate people. Not just about Vietnam or World War II, but about the values of courage, honor, and standing up for others. Your grandpa's story is a perfect example of that. Joe shook his head modestly. I don't need any attention, Mr. Norris. I'm happy staying, out of the spotlight. I understand, Chuck said kindly. But sometimes staying silent lets the wrong lessons win. If we don't speak up, kids might grow up thinking heroes are only found in movies, or worse, that they don't exist at all. Lily looked at her grandpa, her heart swelling with pride. She had always known he was special, but hearing Chuck talk about him like this made her realize just how much his story mattered. Okay, Joe said finally, after a long pause. If you think it'll help, I'll share my story. But only because you asked so nicely, and because Lily believes in it. Chuck smiled warmly. That's all I needed to hear. Later that day, Chuck returned to Maplewood Middle School. He met with Principal Thompson and proposed an idea: a special assembly to honor veterans and discuss the importance of respecting those who serve. To make it even more impactful, he suggested inviting Joe Parker to speak. Principal Thompson was hesitant at first. Are you sure he'd be comfortable doing that? Public speaking isn't easy for everyone. He's willing, Chuck assured her. And trust me, he has a lot to say. With the plan set, word spread throughout the school about the upcoming assembly. Students buzzed with excitement, eager to see Chuck Norris in person again. Teachers prepared materials about military history, and parents were invited to attend, as well. On the day of the event, the auditorium was packed. Rows of students sat eagerly, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of Chuck Norris, who stood confidently on stage. Beside him sat Joe Parker, looking slightly nervous but determined. Lily sat in the front row, beaming with pride as she watched her grandpa take center stage. When it was time for Joe to speak, Chuck handed him the microphone and gave him an encouraging nod. Joe cleared his throat and began hesitantly, his voice trembling at first. I'm not used to talking in front of crowds, he admitted, earning a few chuckles from the audience. But I wanted to share something with you today. Not because I think I'm special, but because I believe every soldier has a story worth telling. He went on to describe his experiences in Vietnam, focusing less on the battles themselves, and more on the friendships he formed and the lessons he learned. He talked about teamwork, resilience, and the importance of looking out for one another. Values he hoped would resonate with the students. By the time he finished, the entire auditorium erupted into applause. Even the teachers wiped away tears, moved by the sincerity of his words. Chuck stepped forward next, his presence commanding yet gentle. Folks, men like Joe Parker aren't just heroes. They're examples of what it means to live with integrity. When someone disrespects them, they're disrespecting the very ideals our country stands for. His gaze shifted toward Mr. Daniels, who sat stiffly near the back of the room. Teaching is about inspiring respect, not instilling fear. What happened to Lily was wrong, not just because of the slap, but because it dismissed the legacy of heroes like Joe. We owe them better than that. The crowd murmured in agreement, and several students turned to glare at Mr. Daniels. Flustered and humiliated, he sank lower in his seat, unable to meet anyone's eyes. As the assembly drew to a close, Chuck announced that the school would be starting new programs to honor veterans and educate students about their sacrifices. He also encouraged everyone to take a moment each day to thank someone who served, not just on holidays but year-round. When the event ended, Lily rushed backstage to hug her grandpa tightly. "You were amazing, Grandpa," she exclaimed. Joe chuckled, ruffling her hair affectionately. "Thanks, kiddo, but I couldn't have done it without your support," and Mr. Norris's encouragement. Chuck joined them moments later, clapping Joe on the shoulder. "You did great, Joe. Real heroes don't shout. They lead by example, And today, you showed everyone exactly what that looks like. As the three of them walked out of the auditorium, together, Lily felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for Chuck Norris's intervention, but for the chance to see her grandpa recognized for the incredible man he truly was. The days following the assembly brought a wave of change to Maplewood Middle School. Students buzzed excitedly about what they had learned, sharing stories about family members who had served in the military. Teachers noticed a shift in the classroom atmosphere. Students seemed more thoughtful, asking questions about history and showing genuine interest in learning about sacrifices made by veterans. Even Mr. Daniels, though still visibly shaken, kept a low profile, avoiding eye contact with both Lily and her grandpa whenever they crossed paths. Principal Thompson wasted no time implementing the new programs Chuck Norris had suggested. Posters honoring veterans lined the hallways, featuring photographs and short biographies submitted by families in the community. A wall of honor was set up near the main entrance where students could pin notes thanking soldiers for their service. The most popular addition, however, was a weekly storytelling session during lunch breaks. Veterans from the town were invited to visit the school and share their experiences with the students. Lily became one of the key organizers of these sessions. Her newfound confidence inspired her classmates to get involved, and soon she found herself leading discussions about courage, teamwork, and standing up for what's right. She often introduced the guest speakers, proudly recounting how her grandpa's story had sparked this movement. One Friday afternoon, after a particularly moving talk by a Navy veteran named Harold, Chuck pulled Lily aside. "You're doing great work here," he said, his voice warm with approval. "Thanks," Lily replied, smiling shyly. "But it's not just me. It's everyone working together." Chuck nodded. "Exactly. That's how real change happens. People coming together for a common cause." He paused, glancing around the crowded cafeteria. "Still, I can tell you've got leadership in you. Don't lose that fire." Lily felt a surge of pride, but also a twinge of nervousness. Leading wasn't always easy, especially when others looked to her for answers. But she reminded herself of something her grandpa had once told her. Courage isn't about never being scared. It's about doing what's right even when you are. Meanwhile, Joe Parker continued to play an important role in the school's initiatives. Though he preferred staying out of the spotlight, he agreed to speak at several events, always emphasizing the importance of kindness and respect. His humility resonated deeply with the students, many of whom began seeing him as a role model. One day, after a morning session with 8th graders, a boy named Ethan approached Joe hesitantly. "Mr. Parker?" he asked, clutching a folded piece of paper in his hands. "Can I ask you something?" Joe smiled kindly. "Of course, son. What's on your mind?" Ethan unfolded the paper, revealing a drawing of a soldier standing tall against a battlefield backdrop. "I made this for my dad," he explained. "He's overseas right now and I wanted to give it to him when he comes home, but I don't know if it's good enough." Joe studied the picture carefully, his eyes softening. "This is wonderful. Ethan, your dad will love it, not because it's perfect, but because it comes from your heart. That's what matters most." Ethan beamed, clearly relieved. "Thanks, Mr. Parker. You're really cool, you know that?" Joe chuckled, patting the boy on the shoulder. "Just passing along some wisdom, kiddo. Remember, we're all stronger than we think." Back at home, Lily and Joe reflected on the changes happening around them. Over dinner one evening, Joe remarked, "It's funny, isn't it? One little incident at school led to all this." "It's not so little," Lily corrected him gently. "What happened to me mattered. And now, thanks to Mr. Norris and you, people are starting to realize that." Joe nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe. But it's not just about us, Lily. It's about keeping those values alive: respect, honor, gratitude. Those things should never go out of style." Lily mulled over his words as she cleared the dishes. She knew her grandpa was right, but she couldn't help feeling grateful for the way everything had turned out. If it hadn't been for Chuck Norris stepping in, none of this might have happened. Speaking of which, later that week, Chuck stopped by the house again. This time he didn't bring donuts, just a quiet determination in his step. When Lily answered the door, he greeted her warmly before turning to Joe. "I've been thinking," he said, taking a seat at the kitchen table. "All this progress is great, but there's one thing left to address." Joe raised an eyebrow, curiously. "And what's that?" "Mr. Daniels," Chuck replied firmly. "He hasn't faced any consequences for what he did. Sure, he's laying low now, but that doesn't fix the problem. Justice needs to be served, not just for Lily, but for every student who deserves a safe and respectful environment." Lily frowned, feeling conflicted. Part of her wanted to let the matter rest. After all, Mr. Daniels hadn't caused any more trouble since the assembly. But another part of her knew Chuck was right. Ignoring the issue wouldn't make it disappear. "What do you suggest?" Joe asked cautiously. Chuck leaned forward, his expression serious. "We need to hold him accountable. Not through anger or revenge, but through fairness. Let's give him a chance to apologize publicly and take responsibility for his actions. If he refuses, he'll face the consequences," Joe finished, nodding slowly. Lily swallowed hard, her heart pounding. "Do you think he'll actually apologize?" "We won't know unless we try," Chuck said simply. The next day, Principal Thompson called a meeting with Mr. Daniels, Chuck, and Joe. The air in the office was tense as they sat down to discuss the situation. "Mr. Daniels," Principal Thompson began, her tone firm but calm. "We've discussed your behavior extensively, and it's clear that what happened cannot be ignored. However, we'd like to offer you an opportunity to make amends. Will you apologize publicly to Lily, to her grandfather, and to the entire school?" Mr. Daniels shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his face pale. For a long moment he said nothing. Then finally he sighed deeply. I suppose I owe them that much," he admitted reluctantly. Chuck nodded approvingly. "Good. Apologies aren't easy, but they're necessary. Just remember, you're not apologizing to save yourself. You're apologizing because it's the right thing to do." 2 days later, during morning announcements, Mr. Daniels stood in front of the entire school. His voice trembled as he spoke, but his words carried weight. "To Lily Parker, her grandfather, Joe, and everyone else affected by my actions, I'm sorry. I was wrong to dismiss your feelings and disrespect your family's legacy. It won't happen again." The room fell silent as the weight of his apology sank in. Some students looked skeptical, while others nodded in approval. Lily, sitting in the front row, felt a mix of emotions: relief, satisfaction, and even a bit of pity for the man who had finally owned up to his mistakes. When the announcement ended, Chuck gave Lily a reassuring smile. "See? Sometimes admitting fault takes more courage than anything else." As the day went on, Lily realized something important. Justice wasn't about punishment. It was about healing. And for the first time since the incident, she truly felt at peace. The weeks leading up to Veterans Day were filled with excitement and anticipation in the town of Maplewood. The annual parade had always been a beloved tradition, but this year felt different. Thanks to the efforts of Lily, Joe, and Chuck Norris, the event took on new meaning. It wasn't just about floats and marching bands anymore. It was about honoring heroes both past and present, and teaching the community to never forget their sacrifices. Lily threw herself into helping organize the parade, working closely with her teachers and local organizers. She helped design posters, handed out flyers around town, and even convinced several businesses to sponsor banners celebrating veterans. Her enthusiasm was contagious, inspiring others to pitch in however they could. By the time the big day arrived, the entire town buzzed with energy. On the morning of Veterans Day, Lily woke up early, too excited to sleep any longer. She dressed quickly in a red, white, and blue outfit her mom had sewn specially for the occasion, a nod to patriotism that made her feel proud. After breakfast, she hurried over to her grandpa's house, where Joe was already waiting outside, wearing his old military uniform. "You look sharp, Grandpa," Lily said, grinning as she adjusted the medals pinned to his chest. "Thanks, kiddo," Joe replied, chuckling softly, "though I think these medals are shinier than I remember." Just then, a familiar truck pulled into the driveway. Chuck Norris stepped out, tipping his cowboy hat as he approached. "Morning, folks. Ready to show this town what real heroes Look like? Lily laughed. You're the one people are going to cheer for, Mr. Norris. Chuck shook his head modestly. Not today, Lily. Today's about your grandpa and all the brave men and women who've served our country. As they walked toward the starting point of the parade, the streets were already lined with families eager to celebrate. Children waved tiny American flags, while parents snapped photos and chatted animatedly. Local news crews set up cameras along the route, capturing every moment of the festivities. When it came time for the procession to begin, Lily linked arms with Joe, beaming with pride as they stepped forward. Chuck followed close behind, waving to the crowd and occasionally pausing to shake hands with veterans or pose for pictures. The cheers grew louder as they passed by, echoing through the crisp autumn air. At one point, a group of elementary school kids rushed up to Lily and Joe holding handmade signs that read, "Thank you, heroes." One little boy tugged on Joe's sleeve shyly. "Are you really a war hero?" he asked. Joe knelt down so he was eye level with the child. "I'm just a guy who did his best to help others," he said kindly. "But thank you for asking. That means a lot." The boy smiled brightly before running back to join his friends. Lily watched the exchange, her heart swelling with admiration for her grandpa. He might not see himself as extraordinary, but to everyone else he was nothing short of amazing. As the parade continued, Chuck noticed how much joy the event brought to the community. Strangers hugged each other, tears streaming down their faces as they remembered loved ones who had served. Even those without direct ties to the military seemed moved by the spirit of unity and gratitude surrounding them. After the parade ended, the celebration moved to the town square, where a stage had been set up for speeches and performances. As the crowd gathered, Principal Thompson introduced the first speaker, Joe Parker. Joe stepped onto the stage, looking slightly nervous but determined. Lily sat in the front row, giving him an encouraging thumbs up as he adjusted the microphone. "Folks," Joe began, his voice steady despite the sea of faces staring back at him. "I didn't plan on being here today. In fact, I spent most of my life trying to stay out of the spotlight. But sometimes life pushes you to do things you wouldn't normally do, and if telling my story can help someone understand the importance of respect and courage, then I'll gladly share it." He went on to talk about his experiences in Vietnam, emphasizing not the battles themselves but the bonds he formed with his fellow soldiers. He spoke about the importance of teamwork, resilience, and looking out for one another, not just on the battlefield, but in everyday life. "When we honor veterans," Joe concluded, "we're not just remembering the past, we're reminding ourselves of the values that keep us strong as a community. Respect, gratitude, and kindness, they matter more now than ever." The audience erupted into applause, many standing to give Joe a standing ovation. Chuck joined, him on stage clapping enthusiastically before taking the microphone himself. "Joe's right," Chuck said, his deep voice carrying across the square. "Heroes aren't defined by medals or titles, they're defined by their actions. And true strength comes from protecting others, not tearing them down." His gaze swept over the crowd, lingering briefly on Mr. Daniels, who stood near the back, looking uncomfortable but attentive. "We all make mistakes," Chuck continued. "But what matters is how we learn from them and grow. Let's use today as a reminder to treat each other with compassion and understanding, not just today, but every day." By the time the speeches ended, the sun was beginning to set, casting a golden glow over the festivities. Fireworks lit up the night sky, painting streaks of red, white, and blue against the dark canvas above. The crowd cheered and clapped, their spirits lifted by the sense of unity and purpose that had filled the day. Later that evening, as the celebrations wound down, Chuck pulled Lily aside for a quiet moment. "You know," he said, his tone thoughtful, "you've done something incredible here. You've reminded this town what it means to stand together." Lily blushed, shaking her head modestly. "I couldn't have done it without you, or my grandpa." Chuck smiled warmly. "Maybe not. But don't underestimate yourself, Lily. Leadership isn't about doing everything alone. It's about inspiring others to join you in making a difference. And that's exactly what you've done." Lily thought about his words long after he left, heading back to wherever his adventures would take him next. As she watched the last fireworks fade into the night, she realized something important. Change didn't happen overnight, but with courage and determination, anything was possible. The days following Veterans Day brought a sense of calm to the town of Maplewood. The excitement of the parade had faded, but its impact lingered. People talked about it for weeks, how meaningful it was, how united everyone felt, and how proud they were of Lily and her grandpa. Even Mr. Daniels seemed to have turned a corner. Though still reserved, he made an effort to connect with students, offering kind words and encouragement whenever he could. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, and sometimes that was enough. Lily noticed the changes too. At school, kids approached her more often, asking questions about her grandpa or sharing stories about their own families. Teachers began incorporating lessons about respect and gratitude into their classes, using examples from recent events to illustrate their points. The Wall of Honor in the hallway remained a popular spot, covered in notes and drawings from students thanking veterans and active duty soldiers alike. One afternoon, after helping add new decorations to the wall, Lily found herself sitting alone in the library, flipping through a history book. She paused on a page about Vietnam, staring at a black and white photograph of soldiers trudging through dense jungle. For the first time, she truly understood what her grandpa must have gone through. Not just the physical challenges, but the emotional toll of being so far from home. Thinking hard, huh? Lily looked up to see Chuck Norris standing there, his cowboy hat tilted slightly as he smiled down at her. "Mr. Norris?" she exclaimed, closing the book quickly. "I didn't hear you come in." Chuck chuckled, pulling up a chair to sit beside her. "Sorry if I startled you, just wanted to check in before I hit the road again." "You're leaving already?" Lily asked, disappointment creeping into her voice. "Yeah, kiddo. There are other places that need a little help, and I can't stay in one place for too long. But I wanted to say goodbye and remind you of something important." "What's that?" "That this isn't the end," Chuck said firmly. "What you've started here, it's just the beginning. You've shown this town what it means to stand up for what's right, to honor those who deserve it, and to bring people together. Now it's your job to keep that spirit alive." Lily nodded slowly, absorbing his words. "I'll try my best. That's all anyone can ask for," Chuck replied, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "And remember, courage isn't about never being scared. It's about doing the right thing even when you are." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sunlight filter through the library windows. Finally, Chuck stood up, tipping his hat. "Take care of yourself, Lily, and give your grandpa my regards." "I will," she promised, smiling as he walked away. That evening, Lily joined her grandpa on the porch where they often spent time together after dinner. Joe was sipping his usual cup of coffee, gazing out at the sunset. Strings of white lights twinkled above them, casting a soft glow over the yard. "You know," Joe said thoughtfully, "I never imagined I'd be part of something like this. All those years I kept my stories to myself, thinking no one would care. Turns out people do." Lily leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. "Of course they care, Grandpa. Your story matters, just like everyone else's." Joe chuckled softly. "Well, I suppose it does now. Thanks to you, kiddo." Lily shook her head. "Not just me. Everyone helped. The teachers, the students, Mr. Norris. And don't forget yourself." Joe interrupted gently. "You stood up for what you believed in even when it was hard. That takes guts, Lily, real guts." She smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. For so long she had doubted her ability to make a difference. But now, surrounded by the love and support of her family and community, she knew she was capable of anything. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Joe reached over and squeezed her hand. "You know what I'm most proud of?" "What?" "That you didn't let anyone tell you your voice didn't matter. You proved them wrong. And in doing so, you reminded everyone else why it's so important to speak up." Tears pricked at the corners of Lily's eyes, but she blinked them away, determined not to cry. "Thanks, Grandpa. That means a lot." Joe grinned, ruffling her hair affectionately. "Anytime, kiddo. Anytime." The next morning, Lily woke up feeling lighter than she had in months. She dressed quickly and headed outside, where she spotted a familiar figure walking down the street. It was Chuck Norris, suitcase in hand, heading toward his truck. "Mr. Norris," she called out, running to catch up with him. He turned around, smiling warmly. "Morning, Lily. What's got you up so early?" "I just wanted to say thank you," she said breathlessly, "for everything. I couldn't have done any of this without you." Chuck tipped his hat, his expression softening. "You're welcome, Lily, but remember, one day someone might look up to you the way you look up to me. When that happens, pass along what you've learned. Teach them to be brave, to stand up for others, and to always do what's right." Lily nodded earnestly. "I will, I promise." With a final wave, Chuck climbed into his truck and drove off, disappearing down the road. Lily watched until the dust settled, then turned back toward her house, a renewed sense of purpose in her step, and as she walked, she thought about all that had happened. The slap, the assembly, the parade, and everything in between. None of it had been easy, but each challenge had taught her something valuable. She had learned the power of standing up for herself and others, the importance of honoring those who came before her, and the strength that came from unity. When she reached the porch, Joe was waiting for her, holding 2 mugs of hot chocolate. "Thought you might need this," he said, handing her one. "Thanks, Grandpa," she replied, taking a sip. "This is perfect." They sat together in companionable silence, watching the sunrise paint the horizon in shades of gold and pink. Somewhere in the distance, an American flag fluttered gently in the breeze, a reminder of the values they held dear: courage, respect, and gratitude. Lily glanced at her grandpa, her heart swelling with pride. No matter where life took her, she knew one thing for certain. She would always carry his legacy with her, and she would continue to make him proud.